All right. Hi, Steve. Good morning.
Hi, Elsa. Good morning. Good morning, everybody.
I'm so glad you could join me. And you look so handsome in your short sleeve shirt.
Hardly, but it's comfortable.
Well, yesterday it was, I think, 70 degrees here in Charlotte. So
Oh, it was fantastic.
fantastic. I think everybody in my neighborhood was outside doing a walk.
Right. It was a
So,
COVID dodge. Out walking around the neighborhood.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, Steve, I want to introduce you to the people who are listening. So I've had the pleasure of knowing you for the last 3 years. We have met through our Charlotte support group, our spasmodic dysphonia support group that's led by Mary Bufaro. And I'll never forget that first meeting. I think you sat to the left of me and we kind of bonded right away in that very first meeting. And I think you moved here 3 years ago. Is that right?
Just 3.
Okay. And you're originally from Pittsburgh. You've lived in 10 cities across the United States.
10 cities.
Yes. And you've been trained as a pilot.
Yes.
And you most recently worked for American Airlines as a pilot. And then you transitioned to a trainer, a flight trainer.
Correct. I spent most of my working life as a pilot. And thanks to my wonderful wife, Barb, who was basically a single parent through all those years, we made a go of it. But it was challenging life.
Yeah. And then before, or at some point, you did a stint as a photographer. You were doing wedding photography and I think most recently real estate photography. Is that right?
It's kind of a long story, but it had my daughter had a bad accident and she's doing great right now, but Barb needed some help at home. And so I had the opportunity of leaving the airline. And then I was trying to figure out what I would do. And I always had photography as a hobby. I said, well, I'll just be a photographer. Little did I know how involved it was that you don't take, the important thing is you become a business owner whose product happens to be photography. So once I made that leap and learned that, hey, I'm actually running a business and it just happens to be photography, which is about 10% of what I do, then the business took off and actually ended up photographing 500 weddings and met some fantastic clients throughout the journey.
That's great. I can't imagine what it was like navigating bridal parties with SD that had to be a bit challenging at times.
Yeah, it wasn't quite as bad in the early years, but part of contemporary wedding photography is just to be an observer. You still have to have a lot of interaction with the clients, but instead of being a director, you're a little bit more of an observer of what's transpiring.
That makes sense. Okay. And most recently, you work part time for a company called Lessonly. Is that right?
Yes. So just fast forward, I was missing the aviation business and had the opportunity of coming back as a trainer first, as a corporate trainer, training on corporate aircraft, which I did in Columbus, and then had the opportunity of returning to American, which I left 12 years earlier, and work as a simulator instructor in, here in Charlotte.
One of the things that just inspires me so much about you, Steve, is you've lived with SD for so many years, and yet you've had all of these jobs. You continue to provide for your family. You're a contributor. I mean, that's really something to be proud of. And I'm sure it wasn't easy, especially those days as an AA trainer, because I remember you telling me there'd be engines and all kinds of ambient sound, and you're trying to teach these future pilots. I mean, how did you do that?
And I think, and we all with ST go through this. When you meet somebody, and especially now with COVID, I think we're doing it a lot more. The first thing you say is, because you can tell by looking at them that they think you're sick.
Yeah.
And so it's been a big issue since COVID, especially. So what worse is just being upfront, have a vocal cord disorder. If you can't understand me, just let me know. And then try and make humor, use a little bit of humor along with that.
Yeah, that's
And it usually works. People are typically responsive.
and I think that's, sorry, go ahead.
Once they find out you're not contagious.
Exactly. Well, that's where I was going next, because the movie that Shane Hartline just produced and released, Cookie. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it.
Haven't had a chance to see it.
So the woman who portrays the character who has spasmodic dysphonia, her name's Gabby. She's a waitress, and she has to use her voice, obviously, to take orders. And in one scene, there's a man trying to order, and he hears her voice, and he said, "What's wrong with you?" And she said, "Oh, I have a cold." And he said, "Well, I want a different waitress." And then you fast forward to another scene where she's at a casting call, and someone asks her about her voice, and she said, "Well, what lie am I going to make up today?" And that really hit me, because I have done that so many times. I don't know if you have too, where I say, "Oh, I lost my voice," or "I have a history of losing my voice," or, "I haven't been feeling good," or people will just assume that I'm sick. And so to hear you say, very clearly and directly with the people you're teaching, I have a vocal cord thing, and you kind of don't make a big deal about it and you move on. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think rather than make something of people can tell if you're being honest or not. And so I just kind of upfront have a vocal cord disorder and just try and move on.
It's great. And all of us with SD can get something from that, because a lot of times I get stuck in my head about, do I sound bad? Do they understand me? And part of it, I think what you've taught me, the influence you've had on my life, is you just share it with people and you move on and you do your best and trust that people are going to get it. They're going to understand you.
I mean, up to a point, I haven't gone to the point of putting a bearer pin on my lapel saying I have a voice disorder. And it works for some people, but to me, that's just like whatever your disability is. If you have a stutter, voice stutter, that's like saying I stutter and having a pin as a, I don't know, it's just my thing. It works for a lot of people, and it may work in the case you get stopped and for speeding or something, and you have a card, oh, I have a voice disorder. Well, it didn't affect your foot.
See, you're always being funny, Steve. Well, you mentioned COVID, and I know that for a lot of us, we have trouble speaking through a mask. How has that been for you, since you don't wear the pin, and I don't think you have the mask that says I have a voice disorder? How has that been?
Oh, it's horrible. It's impossible.
Yeah.
But it's impossible for everybody. But it's worse for, it's obviously worse for us. And if you have to do a job that requires the use of your voice, that's when it actually became impossible for me to effectively do my job. So it's bad for everybody, but it's especially bad for us.
Mhm.
Um,
So did you get to a point in your trainer career that it just was too difficult and that's what led you to where you are right now?
yeah, I mean, it was getting to the point where it was becoming untenable. And one of the things about the aviation industry is it wasn't cool to wear noise canceling headsets back in the early days, nor was it cool to wheel your bag around, which of course everybody's doing it right now. And so a lot of people have been in the business for a while are hard of hearing, have a hearing disorder. So between me with my voice and a noisy simulator was somebody who's not wearing um, a compensation for their hearing aids, then that became pretty challenging. What? It was constant.
Mm.
So wearing a mask kind of pushed me over the edge of effectively being able to do my job. Then it became not so much about me as about them. Like I'm not giving them
Yeah.
the best possible product.
I'm so sorry for that. And what's it like when, you have a mask on, and I know you're a coffee drinker because we've gone to Starbucks before. What's it like with a mask walking up to Starbucks and ordering?
I try to now order online and just go in and pick up my order. But that's one of the worst things for us, as trying to order through a pickup window. And um, it's kind of impossible to do that effectively. So you just have to make light of it. And if you go order a soy latte and you get a frappuccino, well, maybe the frappuccino is actually better. That's really what you want. You just don't want the sugar.
Does that really happen?
So it's like your whole life with SD. You just have
Oh,
well, that's not working. Try this.
yeah. Well, thank God for online. Thank God. And, my condition, I have a milder form of SD, but for some reason, right when I get up to the Chick-fil-A counter or right when I get to the Starbucks, drive-through box, I just cannot project. It starts breaking it up. No one can understand. And I have my 10-year-old daughter roll down the window in the back and
It's the
she'll
same.
start shouting it out.
And it's the same thing I do with my wife Barb. I said I can't order. You have to order. And so it's the same thing on the phone. Um, it just sounds terrible on the phone. It's a panic. As soon as you pick up the phone, it's kind of the same thing.
Absolutely. I always feel panicky when I have to make a phone call or I know someone's calling me that I might not feel comfortable having a conversation knowing how bad my voice is going to get.
Right. And it's the expectation. I mean, we actually today sound pretty good. It's because
Yeah.
we both have the expectation that each of us is going to sound terrible, which we typically would do in a social environment. Now we sound pretty good just because, you know, it's the expectation we're going to sound bad. So,
Well, you're my friend and I feel very comfortable in your presence. So I give a lot of the credit to you.
same here. Feelings mutual.
Thank you. So you mentioned Barb, the lovely Barb, who's been your wife for how many years?
For 35 years.
35 years.
Um,
Wow. And you have 3 kids and 5 grandchildren.
yes, I do.
And you've lived in 10 US cities together.
Not together, but most of the cities I lived in were chasing my airline career. And so kind of working my way up through a regional and corporate flying. So
And so for people listening that have a Barb in their life, whether it's their husband or wife or a caregiver, what's that like? What's your relationship with Barb? Like how has she been supportive? Because obviously you didn't have SD when you got married. This
Yeah.
just kind of cropped up, and we'll talk about that, how that happened. But how has your relationship evolved, and how has she become a support structure to you?
Um, I think the best support that Barb has given me is, and we all go through periods of feeling sorry for ourselves. And she's been most helpful trying, kicking me in the butt and saying, look, things can be worse. You don't sound that bad. You're just thinking about yourself. And so, and I think that's the best support a loved one could give rather than let you fall into the depths of depression, which we probably have all been through.
Oof,
So,
yes.
like, why me? I want to sound normal. I don't want this to be happening to me. And so she's helped to kick me out of
That's a wonderful gift that she gives to you.
that.
Sounds like my husband. There's been many times, especially early on. Now that I've been living with this for over 10 years, it's gotten easier for some reason, but those first maybe 3, 4, 5 years were so hard. And I think the reason they were so hard for me, and maybe you feel this way too, is because I was clutching like with my nails to my old identity, to all the things that I used to be able to do. And I wanted to be that person still so badly. And I wanted to be able to do what she used to do, which was lead meetings and stand on stages and give presentations and go to a networking event and talk to everybody in the room, or go to a noisy restaurant with live music and be the life of the party. And that just wasn't happening, and it was not going to happen ever again. And the accepting of that was so difficult.
Yeah. You have a tendency to just kind of fall into yourself. And it's especially bad in noisy social situations. The rest of the stuff that you describe, and that's kind of another issue, is leaving a high powered job like you did.
Mm.
And the social, so that's kind of an issue in and of itself that's challenging. I mean, you were at the top of your career, making good money, and now you were forced into a different path.
Which I will say this, Steve, and I think you've heard me say this. There has been many blessings with SD, because I think it has impacted my personal life for the better, because I was so career focused and career obsessed that I wasn't paying attention as much to my husband and my kids as I should have. So losing that part of myself had me focus on what was really important. And I'm thankful for that. And I'm also thankful for the ways I've reinvented my career.
Yeah, you should
And
be
I think
proud.
you are too.
I am. And you should, we both should be proud of ourselves for doing that. And a lot of times, you live long enough like I have, and your life kind of takes different paths along the way. And we were forced into a different path. And there's a lot of really good things about that, things that we wouldn't have experienced if we hadn't taken that path.
Totally. 100%. So take us back, Steve, to when this all first started. You had a normal voice, you became a pilot, you're living the big life. What happened?
Uh, it, it, I didn't really notice or didn't internalize I was having issues with my voice. The first thing I noticed was kind of weird was I was starting having smell issues. I couldn't smell anymore. And I went through the whole process of officially being diagnosed as being asthmatic. ano- anosmic,
Anosmic.
anosmia.
I've never heard of that.
Anosmics. It's just that you can't smell.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
so I went through studies and things like that. And supposedly there's some research that ties the same area of the brain of ST to the smell area. And anyhow, I don't think it matters so much why, if there's nothing that you can do about it, as how you deal with, what you have.
Mhm.
So it first started cropping up when I was teaching classrooms. I was working for flight safety and training NetJets pilots, and part of that was teaching in a classroom of 15 people, and that's what I was having difficulties with my voice, but that where it became difficult. And so my PCP had sent me to see an ENT, not not knowing that the ENT in Columbus, where I was at the time, happened to be the the city expert, he and his wife, of spasmodic dysphonia.
Hmm.
And you know how it is. If somebody has ST and you hear them for the first time, in 5 seconds, you can say, you have spasmodic dysphonia.
Mhm.
And they diagnosed me almost immediately. And of course, um, went through the testing to confirm it.
Mhm. And how old were you when that all started?
Probably 58.
58. Wow. Okay. And look at how far you've come.
I have 5 grandchildren now. That's how far I've come. That's kind of that's the thing I matter about most. If you look at how far I've come, it's all about the kids and grandkids.
Yes, you have a lot to be proud of in your life.
I'm thankful for them.
Yes. So we have talked about in our groups before that I don't believe this is scientifically proven, but there's some discussion that there could be a link between traumatic events, stressful events, and the occurrence of SD, which again, there's no scientific research on this. I'm curious, and I'm starting to ask my guests, I guess, for my own anecdotal discussions. Do you see any potential truth in that? Was there any kind of traumatic event or stress that could have impacted your ability to speak?
I mean, it's definitely possible. I think most of us have had, just population in general, some traumatic event in their lives. But I did have some pretty traumatic events. As I was mentioning, my daughter Kate had a bad accident. My father-in-law was a victim of violent crime and died. So there has been trauma. Well, whether you can point to that as something that was a causal effect, I don't know. I'm not sure it matters
Mm-hmm.
unless there's some, if you think that there's some sort of therapy of dealing with that emotionally can affect your voice, and maybe there is.
Yeah, I have actually been experimenting with a therapy that's, I guess the best way to describe it is trauma release. The trauma like gets pent up in the body and there's a way to release it, which I've been doing it for about a year and I have noticed a difference in my voice quality. I have, but I still have the spasms. It still gets worse, especially when I'm confronted with what I call voice fright, which is like we talked about the phone, going up to the Starbucks counter, even talking to someone that I've never really met before can trigger all of that. So I think it's an interesting point to look at. So what has helped you emotionally on your journey? What have been kind of the sources of inspiration to pull you forward?
And I actually think, and I was in a support group in Columbus, but I think it's our support group here.
Mm-hmm.
Just people are kind of going through it at the same time. I think that we have to be a little careful about too much of that.
Too much of what?
Too much of kind of wallowing together. And I mean, if I'm just gonna be
Is
honest,
that what we
I
do?
would say no, we don't actually do that in our support group. However, when you get a large enough group, whether it's Facebook large group, but I think we're actually pretty good about not, we say, hey, what's been bothering us, but we don't compare notes. I always swore I wasn't going to get old and start. The only conversation I had was about what was wrong with me, because somebody's always going to one up you. If you sit in a McDonald's with a bunch of old guys and he's, well, I just had my knee done. Well, I had both my knees done. So, and in the scheme of things, with what we have, there's a lot worse things that could happen to you and have, be wrong with him.
I agree so much with that. I actually had a breakthrough with that recently. I was doing a meditation, and the meditation was on gratitude. And I've done gratitude meditations before, but it was like a guided meditation. And the voice, what it was saying to us is, think about the thing that you struggle with most and kind of have that in your mind. So I'm thinking, okay, my voice, and it's unreliable and I never know when the spasms are going to come. And then the guy says, now imagine that it's way worse than that. And what would the way worse be? And I'd never thought about it like that. And I thought, well, I guess I could be mute and I could have no voice and I'd have to do sign language. And in that moment, I started crying and crying and crying because I realized, gosh, I might get choked up here, that I can talk to my kids. I can talk to my husband. I do have a voice that functions, and it actually sounds pretty good most of the time. It's a small percent that it doesn't sound good. And it gave me such a sense of gratitude, because I think a lot of times we focus, or I focus on what I don't have versus actually what I do have.
That's kind of my personality, which I fight as being half empty rather than half full. So I'm trying to have a more half full attitude.
You said that perfectly. I think I've had a half empty glass. The first 5 years of SD was a half empty, and then I was forcing myself to see it half full. And I actually think from this meditation that I just did, I have flipped the switch, and I'm a full person now. And it really, mindset is everything. It's everything in life, but I think especially people that have disorders and are struggling with health things, the mind is so important.
Yes, absolutely.
So what are some of your SD pet peeves? We talked about the telephone. What are some of your other SD pet peeves?
I'm not sure if you remember any of those. I think it's just talking on the phone and ordering at a restaurant, trying to communicate behind a mask. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
You're a glass half full kind of guy.
Well, I'm trying to be. I'm not really. It's a constant battle.
We got to get Barb here in the interview. I want to ask her, what's he really like at home?
No, she may be brutally honest. I'm afraid she'd be brutally honest.
That's how our
Um,
spouses are.
right. She used to, she couldn't stand when somebody would come up to her and say, "Oh, Steve's such a nice guy, so great at work. He has such a great personality." And, she was, "Oh, why is he, why is he such a jerk at home?" But I think I try not to
Of course.
be.
Of
I,
course.
I try to be a good supportive husband.
So for the last year, we've been meeting virtually because we can't get together because of COVID. And we've been doing these. Well, actually, I don't know. Did it start in August? I think our Zoom meetings.
I, I think so. I think for the first couple of months, we just didn't do anything.
Yeah. I think
Uh,
we didn't
yeah,
know what was happening and we didn't really have the system in place.
yeah.
But since August or July, whenever that started, we've been having the monthly online support meetings, which I think are fantastic. And I feel like every month there's more and more people. I think this last call, there was close to 30 people, which was great. And to your point, I didn't feel like anyone was waffling.
No,
I
no,
thought it was very supportive,
yes.
and there's always some kind of nugget that we're getting. Now, our meetings are specific to the Carolinas, so I'm assuming that all the support groups kind of have their regional meetings, hopefully something. Um, but I do think what Kim, the executive director of the NSTA, and Rebecca and Mary are doing is so supportive. And sometimes, I'll know the meeting's coming up and I'll be like, oh, but I got this, I got that to do. But I always make it a point to join. Like I see you there. I don't think you've missed one since we've started. And I do find those a big, big source of support. And I think it's because, as soon as I hear somebody else with an SD voice, for some reason, it just calms me down and it makes me feel at home. Does that happen
Yeah.
to you too?
Oh, absolutely, all the time. And as I said in the beginning, that's kind of why we sound a little better today. Although I don't think I sound especially well, but it's just the expectation that you're not going to sound good gives you relaxes you to the point where you actually do sound better. So it's kind of a snowball effect.
We just feel relaxed and there's no expectation.
Right. And there's no question that your spasmodic dysphonia is better if you are relaxed.
So, what would you say to the person that's listening right now that is feeling kind of down in the dumps? Maybe how I was feeling those first 3 to 5 years, or however long you were wallowing. What would you say that's made a difference for you? And how would you encourage them?
I think probably the biggest thing is just to give yourself a break. Try and use humor as much as possible, not take yourself too seriously. Um, it's pretty hard to take yourself seriously when you sound like Donald Duck after a Botox injection. Anyway, but just, I mean, it's like you would do in any sort of social situation, which is where this crops up. So, whether whatever it is, disability appearance or whatever, if you can interject a little bit of humor, it makes you feel better and more comfortable, and it makes them feel better as well.
That's great.
And plus, I would the support groups, our support group, the support group in Columbus were just hugely beneficial. Um, it's kind of a two-edged sword. So a, a big Facebook group, as an example, can be a tremendous source of information and help. Like when I had a Botox injection and it was 6 weeks before I could do anything but whisper, I got so much support. Hey, hang in there, Steve. Hang. That's not that abnormal. 25 people had the same thing happen. So it was a huge help for me. But you have to kind of get out, not to, I wouldn't make that, I would use that as a benefit. And this is just for me, um, not to make that your life, get out into the real world and force yourself into doing something, try and socialize. And people are usually open and kind of, will give you a break just like you would do with somebody who has a disability.
They need someone to kick them in the butt like Barb does to you and Tate does to me, right?
Yeah, exactly. You have to kind of kick yourself in the butt a little bit, and it's hard. So, whatever it is, if you have a hobby, um, if you like to, sketch, look for a meetup group. Although it's kind of hard now, most of them are doing it virtually. But just to get out there and be social, not not dwell as much as possible on your disability.
I like your recommendation to do something that kind of lights you up, is the way I heard it. Do something that brings you joy, that makes life worth living. Like yesterday, it was sunny here in North Carolina. Went outside. I had been feeling kind of down previous to that. And just being outside, getting some sun on my face, moving my body, wasn't any kind of exercise, but it was just walking,
Sure.
light walking. I felt great, and it totally changes the mindset.
It does, definitely.
Well, Steve Barry, I thank you so very much for your wisdom and for your inspiration and encouragement.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Elsa. I'm not so sure how inspiring I am, but it's one person's story, what they're dealing with. And, I would just say to somebody who has just started dealing with this, just kind of hang in there, you know, um, treat yourself kindly and things will work out.
Wonderful words from a very good friend. Thank you so much, Steve.
Sure, Elsa. Thank you.